Hey everybody, it's Harbinger Von Sin. Due to the sensitive nature of the topics we're discussing tonight, listener discretion advised. So, welcome. This is the first installment of the Intellectualist podcast. I am Harbinger Von Sin. Today I will be joined by Teacher's Pet and Harmony Ginger. Terrible. We just call this person Ginger, to be honest. We're glad that you joined us for our test run. It may be rough, but we appreciate you. And how are you two doing today?
Great.
I'm doing super well today. Thank you.
Really? That's like the real answer that you guys have for me? I'm doing great. Give me some context, some meat, something.
Long day at work, but good way to end the week. Got a lot ahead of me this weekend. A little existential, but overall just glad to be here right now.
All
I'm
right.
working hard at my book, so that's I don't know. It's a blessing and a curse.
Lit. So today we're going to talk about these headlines that are in the news about the rise in teen suicide rates. So, the article, one of the articles that I've read is Washington Post. It was published yesterday, and it basically outlines the ways in which teen suicide is actually being researched and stuff, which we'll get to later. But I just want to give a little bit of context. So basically, in the article, it outlines that while the rate of homicide and suicide has risen globally, that this is to say that that rate has risen sharply in youth. I did read another article that specifically spoke about African American youth. That's not something we'll cover today, but there will be links in the thing below if you want to hit those up. Suicide rates among the youth is definitely outpacing other age groups. Before, I think it's 2007, youth suicide rates were extremely rare. So what we're going to do is talk about some of the attributes that are being researched and studied that, kind of encompass why things are happening in this ways. So I'd like to start with something a little organic, just maybe from your personal experiences. This is not a subject that I relate to. I didn't really have any friends that thought about harming themselves when I was young, and I was not ever really in the mindset of thinking something like that myself. But the reason why I brought my two guests in is because they are well experienced, both professionally and anecdotally. So you guys take it away. We'll start with Ginger.
Thanks. For me, when I was growing up, I'm LGBT, and so we have spiked rates of suicide in our demographic. And in high school and middle school, I had friends that were victims or would call me, and I'd have to call EMT and all this. So without having a specific figure at hand for that kind of thing, I do know that LGBT face a lot of obstacles that may increase the proclivity to be suicidal. And then in addition to that, trans, especially trans women, it becomes the more intersections you have, the more I guess the higher the rates can get. But yeah, as me personally, that's something that I've had to face. But eggs, what do you have?
I've got here that youth suicide's like huge. It's always been like that's probably the most tragic thing. I think that out of all the tragedy that exists in the world, I think people like under the age of 30 just ending their lives not because they are supposed to die. Like, when I was 8, I don't know, like I was literally planning it out. I used to like tie belts together, try to figure out how to suspend them from the air vent because I'd pretty much just like decided that I'd seen enough of humanity already, and it's like a pretty bleak place to be in. There's literally nothing that you can do. I was smart. I had everything going for me. I didn't have like such a defined like reason for my feelings like Ginger. You definitely had like oppression, and you're in a demographic that's traditionally a little bit more inclined to be depressed. I didn't really have that. Like I'm a straight cis white male from a nice neighborhood, and the problems that I had were a little bit more like implicit and emotional. It was definitely like it had a lot to do with my parents splitting up. It had a lot to do with like how boring school was for me and how I just wasn't entertained. Didn't feel like I was learning anything important. And it sort of led me into this really bleak place where there's just nothing you can do that makes your life better. And I'm so sad to hear that the number of people who are getting into that position, younger and younger, is going.
Attributes are basically the reasons why, or some of the symptoms of any particular issue. One of them I want to discuss is a change in societal structures and social structures. What do you guys think about that? Like, what does that mean to you?
I'll go first. You don't. I think that there's an amount of, like in Germany, they have this movement among that's called No Future, and people, like teenagers especially, will spray paint No Future everywhere. If you go to Germany, you can find it in the bathrooms in the airports. You find it in the villages on the sides of bars, and there's been this perpetuation in the 21st century through the internet and through the depressing nature of pollution and climate change and imprisonment and drug prohibition and all of these things that contribute to like people who want to rebel or don't want to participate traditionally in the system basically being ostracized and humanized. And I think that that has a lot to do with it. That if your interests are not necessarily aligned with the status quo, that it's becoming harder and harder and harder, as it always has, to find a place in the world. That's what it means to me, at least.
Yeah, Ginger, how about you?
So I think addressing things systemically would be acknowledging like a triad of knowledge, power, and self. And so, like, especially in communication sciences, like how messages are conveyed to the public and the solidarity that youth might feel or not feel. Like, a good example is like if, like, on Netflix, like this show 13 Reasons Why saw an uptick in youth suicidal thoughts or attempts or rates of actually succeeding. Um, and it's sort of like we should focus on being more responsible because obviously that was something that was like a root cause of that. And to kind of reframe things and understand things from a community-based perspective would be better than kind of just continuing to say like like something that shirks it onto the youth, or that doesn't address like that. I mean, ultimately, like if you've got power, you've got to be responsible with that power, and you can't just blame the victim when your power makes them feel oppressed in a way that they can't express themselves.
Yeah, so things that I think about when, I'm thinking about the social structure and how
1 sec.
So,
So sorry, Harbinger. You're cutting out a little bit. Can you just
hello?
rephrase? Yeah, can you just rephrase what you said?
Yeah, so I said some things that I think about when I think about social structures and how things really change and stuff is basically, like uh, how people say like knowledge is power, right? And it really, really, truly is. But how much of that power is destructive? Okay, so like while I am a staunch believer that being both self-taught and being interested in things is great for your life. I wonder, like maybe if you guys think that some of our youth, globally too, having more access and the proliferation of like philosophies like nihilism and works by people like Jordan Peterson and things that like really force you to look at your own actions and what you are doing. While it can be helpful to maybe a mature mind, might be aiding and crippling this youthful brain that's supposed to like pretty much operate in a place of like wonder and imagination and maybe not as jaded or capable of accepting uh, reality in that way yet. What do you guys think?
If I may, like one thing that I find really interesting that comes from like it came up in a course on bioethics that I had, and I thought it was such a remarkable moment in the course, and we just breezed past it. Is one of the criticisms of prescription meds or pharma or anything like that is we've gone from like the 60s and 70s being exploratory, like, acid and weed and like mushrooms, like these are all exploratory ways in which, like, say what you want, but like, people went to Woodstock at the time, they did these things, and it was like, it was like a way of connecting with other people and exploring the self in a very like abstract way. And instead we've now like made those things so stigmatized, and instead like favored and proliferated these medicines of control like ADD meds or like antipsychotics, or like, and the
Yeah,
way that they're prescribed, it's so different. It's like you want to discipline rather than encourage that exploration.
right.
Does this make sense?
Yeah, before we move on to like drugs and things, because I think that's a really important space to occupy in this conversation, I want to move back a little bit to community. Basically, you touched on a little bit about using some of these mind expanding drugs, but using them communally. So another one of the attributes that a lot of the articles highlight is a lack of community. And that is expressly propagated by an increase in social media platforms and usage by the young. Um, so, what do you have to say on that, teacher's pet? Like, do you feel like you see those ties as closely linked, or
Ties between
social
drugs
media?
or
No.
social.
A lack of
I think that
helping to propagate these kinds of things, these statistics.
I think that the like extremely vapid, like transient nature of everything that was important to the kids who were my age was part of the reason that I felt so disenchanted and isolated and alienated.
Okay.
Because like the kids my age were like, like when I was 8 or 9, it wasn't such a big deal. But when I got to middle school, got to the point where all the girls cared about was what people said about them, and all the guys cared about was what the people said about them.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was the one person in the whole world who actually wanted something that had genuine intrinsic meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And it really made me feel like I was living somewhere where it was impossible to achieve. And like
Mm-hmm.
even my teachers were teaching us that, it was more about what you could do than about what you wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting what you're saying, because if you're looking back, right, and our listeners can do this with us, think back to your childhood, or if you are freshly out of your adolescence. Um, when you are 12, 13, 14, these are extremely important years. They're extremely formative years, right? So the things that you both tell yourself and the things that you're being told are expressly important to the dynamic that you'll experience as as a young person of the world once you are, growing into an adult. And I don't like I'm torn on this, because I feel like a lack of community, isolation can bear fruits that are unforeseeable. Being able to like maybe focus on nature more, or being able to really focus on self-exploration in positive ways, that those things can happen. But I think when we're talking about a lack of community in regards to social media, it is really about um, the glorification of solitude, and the glorification of, being able to operate autonomously, um, both inside yourself and like, kind of overlapping into this like almost like machine place.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
I definitely wouldn't. Go ahead, Ginger.
so like in middle school, I am okay. So like I've always been really guarded. I like to. I would say like partially it's about control of like what I put out in the world or take in. But like, I'm like I said, I'm LGBT, but my parents split at a very early age, and so I would be going between custody. I wouldn't have a sense of community where I was. Like, sorry, like I'd never had a consistent friend group, and I remember in middle school, like I got made fun of a lot. I got bullied. I'd come home on AIM, like AOL Instant Messenger, and like kids would tell me like, I didn't know how to dress. I didn't listen to good music. They just really picked on me a lot. And I say all this because like a story that I saw in the news recently was like these kids realized that there was a classmate who he always wore the same clothes. And it comes to find out like his family like didn't treat him well and like he never got more than those clothes. So these classmates of his like saved up their allowance or something. I forget what they did, but they brought him bags of clothes, they gave him new shoes, they did all this stuff. And it really struck my heart a lot because I was like, that's the sense of community that I like. I don't we shouldn't be trying to compete. I think especially when you're young, that's an easy mindset to fall into. But like that kind of compassion shows like, like I'm with you. You don't have to feel like an outcast. I don't want you to feel bad. You know what I mean? Like everybody else is trying to make you feel bad, but like you've got a group here.
Right.
Yeah, you were gonna say,
Sorry.
did you
Yeah.
spot?
Go ahead.
I'd love to touch on Harbinger, your point about social media's like glorification of isolation and autonomy. And I think it's like I live in America. America's a very, I wouldn't say egotistical country, but it's a country where yourself is promoted. You have to be yourself, go out, do things as yourself. Your achievements are what forms you. So we have this system in social media where it's more like not about the value of yourself and your achievements, but just the value of what other people think and what they think when they look at you. And it's egotism. Like it's based in this glorification of if you're egotistical, you take the best care of yourself, you're as vain as you can possibly, you'll find success in the eye. And we're seeing the system backfire in depression because everybody's becoming these vapid scaffolding constructs. It's like a big tarp spread over a bunch of sticks. And there's no actual foundation. People don't know who they are. They just know who other people see themselves to. And
Yeah,
it forms like this emptiness.
yeah. So here's the thing that, um, before like 70 years ago, you know what I mean? there were still schools, there were still bullies, there were still mean kids, there were still problems, but there wasn't as high as suicide. So when I'm thinking about this and I'm questioning myself, I'm trying to figure out, is it literally, I mean, like, the only deciding factor that I can see is the digital age. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
maybe I don't know. My dad, when I was young, my dad would say, to me, a girl who, that's a whole nother discussion. But what I'm about to say might be controversial. Um, uh, he would say, "Save your tears for when you need them." And my father was the oldest of 5, had been working since he was 12, did not have time to stop and think about harming himself because he had so many people latched onto him. And I wonder how much of our society, like, as much as we are moving into a more emotive, more sensitive place, how much that's actually harmful to what we're doing. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think that you brought up, like, there have always been bullies, there have always been schools, but there hasn't always been such a high suicide rate. And I think that I'm not a social scientist, can't give an accurate on this, but I think that if you look at the way that the digital age has sort of increased the person's life communication with other people, not in contact or in relationship, just reading their words, it's a lot higher now because you have your smartphone in your pocket at all times. And if somebody's bullying, you can receive those messages like whenever you're not sleeping. So the percentage of your life where you're allowed to be berated is much higher. You know what I mean? Like in the digital age.
Well, I think what you're actually talking about
is what?
Accessibility.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like before, your bully would have to actually walk to your home or ride a bike to your house or for you after school or whatever. It was like, it was this big dramatic thing.
You'd have to face up with your
right, and you had to make that decision, or maybe out, and that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying that that's what was. And now I agree with you. It's much easier for the mean girls to be like, well, Sally is such a, whatever Sally is. And for that to just spread like wildfire, even if nobody knows who Sally is.
So I think that there's a lot of stuff to be said as to causes, right? I don't know if it's any one thing or even like the shift in how we communicate. Like everything that was said, like I agree with, but I also think like the idea that you can medicate your child because you can't control them in the way you used to because you're at a job that's more demanding. And so you just want the pill to work. You want the PTA to take care of it. And then you just come home and have a kid that's obedient. Kind of forces kids to feel dissociative. And it becomes a breakdown of the family model. And it's a lot more alienating than it used to be, at least for some people. And so I think like also with this, like we just have to look at how we interact with our kids and what responsibility we take on and how much accountability we teach them by example instead of just telling them these things in schoolrooms or through PTA meetings or what the doctor prescribes kind of thing,
I do. Part of my alienation issue was something that you just touched on a little bit. That everybody was just so enchanted with what was being presented to them. Like school and conformity and sports and all of these ideas of becoming a part of the traditionalist society and the uniformity that came with that. And I was never a rebel. I was like goody two-shoes, teacher's pet. The problem that I had was that no one seemed to have any questions. Everybody just accepted what it was that they were fed that was right in front of them. They ate it, they swallowed it, they took it in as a part of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason that I wanted to be out of this so badly, like to the degree of clinical depression, was because there was no me. There was just everyone else, and me as one of them.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I just, for me, like, I won't go too deep into this. Just, I've had stuff happen to me that's bad. And it's made me very, like, I'm consistently apologetic and I always just want to help and I'm always obedient. But I can, I've been a manager of a store before, but I prefer to have an order to answer to. Do you know what I mean? And so, like, I've found that being conditioned to be that way for so many years of my life, now that I'm out trying to find my own career field and sell things as a leader, and you have to occupy these career positions as a leader of the field and like persuade people that you're the one that others answer to. It's like I've never been taught that in a way that I can market it. And it's unfortunate, but like it's because I've always kind of been, it's anecdotal, I'm sorry, but I can identify with people that feel like they are suddenly lost and they feel distanced and then they feel further alienated because, well, you're not a leader, so you're outside the bubble, and it just becomes this huge overlap of ways of pushing you under.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that, it's easy for, especially, people who are close to you, like the adults who are in your surrounding environment, but even up until a certain point, research professionals to see child issues or youth issues as this just being like some kind of caveat of the age that they're in, being temperamental or being anything like that.
On the subject of, we spoke earlier about like Ginger brought up what the doctors prescribe. A lot of the most unique individuals that I went to school with had all been diagnosed with a bunch of disabilities or not disabilities necessarily, but deficiencies or mental malfunctions, disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd been prescribed relevant medications, which, based on my own independent research, you shouldn't be giving young children amphetamines. Like I'm not quite sure if that's. I understand that it's very helpful for kids with ADHD, but there were a lot of kids I know who don't have ADHD. They were diagnosed back then. They were given this medication. They took it for a very long time, and now it's affected their serotonin systems and it's affected their appetite, and they're very depressed now. Like two of the individuals I went to high school with who were falsely diagnosed with ADHD have had some kind of backfiring from having taken amphetamines as a child for a long period of time every day. And there's part of that with it too, is like you're being told that you're wrong, you're being given a pill that will fix it, and if it doesn't, then you have something more wrong with you. Like it's a toxic system to be teaching children that they have to participate in.
To speak to that, because it kind of goes back to Harbinger's original point, and I agree. Like, it's something that I've advocated for is reframing, like, rather than tell you you have a disorder, you have a different set of strengths, and we just have to find out how they're applied. It's not true in every case, but rather than just label everything that's not in conformity with what you think is quote normal, like this is how disability ethics operate, right? You have to have a baseline of what is normal and what's classified as a disability. And it's kind of a crazy question, but it's like, what if what you think is a disability has never been a hindrance at all? Like, what if this person excels at something way more than you do, like Rain Man type stuff, you know?
Yes. I want to read what Gray said here. No one accepted those conditions, accepted those drugs, felt like they belonged to society without them. They felt bad simply for being children. It's a very interesting point. Like, it happened to me. It definitely happened to me. And I don't mean to, like, go off of this attack on mental health facilities, because without them I would probably be dead. I spent time in inpatient. I was medicated. I took antidepressants, SNRIs, for about 6 months. And then I came off like completely unsupervised. I just one day decided, I don't need this anymore. I'm done being depressed. Like I'm going to love my life even if I don't now. And I made it happen. But without all of this, I mean, I really had to get kind of beaten with the fact that I was going to continue to exist before I was willing to accept that I could no longer feasibly be a depressed individual. So I think there's a lot of value in it. But when it comes to things other than whether you're sad or not sad, I think there are some extraneous labels that are put onto people which suppress them, which cause them to feel the need to take these toxic substances. And a lot of people will self-medicate because they feel that they need to, because they feel that there's something wrong with them, even if there isn't necessarily.
Yeah.
So, real quick to touch on that, like, now I'm not a kid anymore. I'm going to be 29 in a week. Um, but this year, like, I talked to my mom to come out of depression. It took a while to self-admit, and then I didn't call home for over a month and a half, and then when I called home, mom, she just knew something was up. So, like, on the phone, she, like, sat down and she was like, "What is it that is scaring you?" Like, and then we had, it was a point blank discussion. And I think if I had to have this moment when I was younger and in like middle or high school, especially as my mom and dad were fighting over custody, like, I didn't have a parent present like that. Like, if I had this moment when I was like 12, I would have to I'd have to find some adopted family, like counselors at school or my friends' parents, and like, I don't know why it's like that, and I know I wasn't alone with that, and I can it's not like, I guess that's part of why it's just not surprising to see these statistics rise, but it's kind of like, I don't want you to come in for a PTA meeting where you tell me, like, how I'm supposed to teach your kids. Like, I want you to come in and, like, look at these stats and find out, like, your job may be killing your kid, and maybe you don't have enough say at your job, so your boss should realize that they're kind of perpetuating this downward spiral, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
So, I really want to touch on a couple of things that have been said. So there's this really interesting. I equate most things to film. I really love film. There's this really old film called A Splendor in the Grass, and before I spoke about how people view youth issues. Splendor in the Grass is basically the telling of a story about a girl who falls in love, and it's not like a love story. It doesn't end well. They're all confused, and hormonally they're acting crazy. They're acting out. But those are things that everybody goes through. And in the film, they treat her passion for this boy, right, as like a mental illness. And they literally put her in a facility. This is like back in 1960 that this is like being openly discussed. This is like a pretty popular film, right? And it makes me think about how we view mental health issues in general, and the lack of support for really having that discussion in an open and organic and honest way. But especially when it's about children, it strikes people because they're so in their minds, they're so innocent and they're so pure, and they should be able to escape the trials that their older counterparts are going through in mass. But for the most part, like especially listening to the stories that you guys have been telling and reading some things in our chat here in our Discord server, um, it becomes painfully obvious to me that this is kind of like it's kind of like a crapshoot. You know what I mean? Like it could go either way. I think like right now, while we're living in the digital age, right? You have the ability to harm yourself much easier. Accessibility to like any number of websites that show you how to hurt yourself and other people, but also, maybe helplines that you couldn't find otherwise, or people to talk to, like in our fair Discord, that you might not, ever approach in real life, and, on the, in the public health side of that, it also makes research capabilities a lot better so that we can, notice when there's a spike in things like this and stuff. So I don't know. I guess I'm saying all of these things because I want to caution us from viewing any one thing as the caveat or viewing any one thing as all bad. And that includes drugs as well.
Yeah, like, so I have a piece here and I'll put it in post. It's called "The Counterintuitive Design to Prevent Teen Suicide." And the conclusion is, I'll just briefly quote it. It's, in this opinion piece, Schuyler will describe her vision for a global forum of youth, by youth, and for youth, intended to facilitate a common understanding and generate workable solutions while disseminating knowledge, tactics, and data based on agile science. And this is a very, very lofty way of kind of, when I was in middle school, I joined a youth group, and it was, it was religious, but it was more about the community. And when I was coming out to my family, I was rejected, and these are the first friends that I came out to while we were on retreat. And like, I can't explain that I felt more accepted by this group than I did with my family, and it really facilitated a whole life change for me. That, I felt like I was empty, and now I had this confidence. Like, there are people out there that even if you're not accepted at home, like, it doesn't mean you're not accepted anywhere. And it's people that I talked to they spoke my language. Like, we were never a page apart. And if something like that can exist for it, obviously you can't just make one program or one approach, or
Yeah.
if something like that can, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right. No, we're good. But like, yeah, I think it's cool that you brought that up. At this point, we're about, 2/3 of the way into this discussion. And the last third of this, just because I don't like to leave people unsatisfied, is like, what do we do as far as solutions? You know what I mean? Like, it would be totally impossible for us to progress as a society without us organically, on the ground level. So maybe not through legislature, or maybe not through like science and research and development, but maybe just us admitting to ourselves that there is maybe a problem and that discussions need to be had. So like, what are those, solution based discussions? Pat, I'm going to throw it to you because I feel like your mouth is wanting to talk.
This is something that I feel extremely strongly about. There's a space between humans, and it's grown. Like, this is an antisocial society. It's one where human interaction is discarded. And we preferentially seek after the lack of interaction and the reclusivity that comes with being able to communicate with people without actually seeing them. And I think you'd be amazed. There's a story that I read, and I know that it's true because I know that the girl died, but she wrote in her suicide note that she went out every day for a week, and if one person had smiled at her, she wouldn't have done it. And I'm just, it's a tragic one, but it amazes me how reluctant everybody is to offer support to people. And there's this stigmatization of depression. I think that in the short term we need to give support to people, And in the long term, we need to move towards acceptance and towards being outgoing and extroverted socially.
I think it's really interesting that you said that. I myself love giving compliments out to people, and it always makes me laugh at how thrown off, I think, like how jarring it is for them to have somebody give them something that isn't like sneaky or underhanded or like, backhanded or anything. But also, I've had many experiences where I just like sing everywhere, whatever. And this one time I was in a parking garage and I was just practicing music. I liked the acoustics of the parking garage and I was waiting for my lift. And I think I had sung through maybe 3 like random German songs, highlighting the language because you couldn't understand them, right? So I was like done, my throat was hurting, whatever, my lift is almost there. This man walks up to me and he looks real weird, like really weird, like sweaty and like a little bit, I don't know, like disheveled. And he comes up to me and I'm like, "Oh yeah, hi." And he's just like, "I just want to thank you. I've been listening to you sing this entire time." And I was like, "Oh yeah, thanks." And he was just like, "No, I don't think you understand. I was sitting in my car and I was about to kill myself. And listening to you sing helped me think." And on the outside, obviously, I didn't want to make him feel insecure about himself. And that's just me being really sensitive. So I didn't let my face react. But on the inside, it was so incredibly shocking to me that there's just, that there can be just people, alone out there, just alone, and no one's there to catch them. And then that's just it. And so, like, when I think about solutions, I think about things like having like actual conversations and listening to the youth, because I think a lot of times their voices are silenced and people are just like, well, suck it up. And everybody has like this kind of road to go down. And, how you come out of it is like the most important part. But like, when you minimize feelings in this way, especially when you're young and everything seems so fatalistic, um, having like a real conversation and one where you ask more questions and make statements, I think is a really great start. Um, you guys have any solutions?
So the way that a parent expresses love for their kid, like
Mm-hmm.
you can have an unconditional trust or love that's completely irrational. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and yet when the kid talks to the parent about their feelings and emotions and like they strongly believe this thing, like it's so easy to dismiss it as like the kid being naive. And I think this is a weird dichotomy because like when you raise people this way, um it's kind of like, I'm applying for a job. I'm in a pool of like 1,000 people applying for this career. HR does not put me in touch with the recruiters or the hiring managers. I don't get any face to face time. It's very alienating. It's very like, if you can't market yourself, then the feeling isn't real. And if you actually feel this way, that is the most morally damaging thing to hear, because it's like, it's literally your life's direction that's being refused. Um, and I think we, a good hiring manager would look at who actually backs it up. You might not have the full experience, like you might only be 15, but if you really want this and you talk to me and I can tell, like I'm not going to refuse you at the door. I'm not going to defer you to like HR. Like if you come to me and you have the drive, I want you. And it's this kind of just like attention that I feel like is not existent. Like you have to build up to that hiring level, but it all starts with just understanding maybe this person isn't naive. Maybe they actually like Greta Thunberg have this understanding of things that is at our level at some regard, and just listen. I don't. I don't know, and facilitate a community-based thing. Like if, facilitate youth groups, help them engage with their peers, like drive them to these. Like I would meet every Friday with a group of friends. My mom would drive me. She would pick me up. She was like, "I'm just so glad you have a community." I like people should have that.
I think also something that's really interesting to me as somebody who did not like being offered really like whack ass sports when I was in school, like if they had like a yoga class, like
Yes.
I don't know if it would or would not help, but maybe it might, or just being given like alternative things to do. I don't know how much this would or would not help, but I know that like lifting up harmful images and glorifying them in the media, images that we don't even need to talk about at this point, right? They're literally just like there for all to see. While those people can have their limelight, I think we need to be creating new lights all the time for other people to stand in as well, so that even if this person has reached a decision that's guiding them into an unwinnable place, which happens, it does happen, that at least we can say as a society, and if we're talking on a global level as a civilization, that we've done our very best to give them the optimal environment to survive. And with that, unfortunately, this is the end of our podcast. I hope you're all grossly unsatisfied and you come back to our next recording. I want to thank Ginger and Teacher's Pet for joining me tonight. And if you'd like to give your 2 cents on what we're doing, please feel free to click the link below and join our Discord server. We would love to hear from you. And that's it, and that's all.